Well, good morning again, fellow Flatbelly travelers and coffee chat people. Another idea we discussed a few days ago at a coffee chat meeting was about money. I know, a little bit different than what we usually talk about. And if you're one of the Flatbelly feeling newsletter readers, I know this doesn't really relate completely, but there's a few points at the very end which might, and it might be of general interest. So we can go with that, and if it's not of interest, that's fine. Maybe the next one will be. The basic title of this idea was money. Where does it come from, and how does it affect the quality of our lives? Now, I usually like to start with definitions, and often the definition relates to the topic. This one didn't really, so it just became a matter of interest, really. I thought it was quite interesting. The origin of the word money comes from moneta. It's a Latin word, and it means mint. What was interesting about it was that money in Rome, at the time when these terms were used, was minted in coins, mainly gold and silver, I guess, in the temple of Juno. Juno was the goddess, wife of Jupiter, and was related to, in Greek mythology, to the goddess Hera, who was sister and wife of Zeus. But what's interesting is that the goddess Hera was like sort of the god of femininity, the god of marriage, the feminine god essentially, and held in high esteem. I think that's interesting, just because, why, generally speaking, money was a guy's game, typically through the ages, that is to say, and yet in Rome they minted it in the temple dedicated to femininity, essentially. So maybe there's something to that. I don't know. It was just interesting. Didn't really relate to this general theme, actually. Now, whether we say it, whether we admit to ourselves right off the bat or not, that money is or isn't important, I think what's telling is our own actions. And most of us spend 8 to 10 hours a day working in some sort of a capacity in order to earn money. Isn't that right? And the question is, if they stopped paying us, would we show up? Probably not. Not for very long anyways. And when we think about money, what it actually is, in terms of our everyday relationship with it, we generally think in terms of currency, don't we? And currency, when we think about it, is really a system of money. It's a medium of exchange. At one time, if you were, say, a farmer, and I was a Wainwright, I was one who could fix wagons, and you had lots of wagons, I could go over to your place, fix your wagons, and in exchange, you could give me vegetables from your garden, right? That would be a compensation for the work I did you could give to me. There was a challenge with this, though, because the vegetables could spoil. I may not be able to eat them all. I may not be able to trade them off to somebody else because they may already have the vegetables that they want. So it was rather an ineffective form of compensation, wasn't it? So humanity, in its almost infinite ability to create and to invent, came up with negotiable instruments which were recognized throughout the town or throughout the city or throughout the countryside in the form of beads, precious stones, these sorts of things, and later on coins minted out of precious metals, predominantly gold and silver. And what would happen then is, when I fixed your wagon wheels, you could give me vegetables, or you could give me this form of negotiable instrument, which I could then use to buy vegetables from somebody else or buy anything else. So it became basically a credit. The value in that was the credit that I could hold and use now, or use later, and use here, or use anywhere else. And this credit could be stored up. So I could store up the value of what it is that I did over time, right? In more modern times, we've gone into what's called fiat currency. And depending on which country you live in, they're called different, they have different names. But generally speaking, they are paper bills, they are, and all of the equivalents, or plastic bills, plastic cards, which are used for electronic data transfer and credit cards, debit cards, these sorts of things, checks. And depending on which country you live in, like I say, you would use different names. Like in Canada, we have the Canadian dollar, which has various denominations. I have some old bills from traveling years and years ago. Some of these are defunct. Some of the countries are defunct, actually. This is Yugoslavian currency, dinari, in 100 to 5,000 dinari bills. I think that's the name of the currency. This is an old bill, 100 forint bill from Hungary. This is an old Mexican peso bill, 2,000 pesos from years ago. And these are two bills from China at the time before China opened up to commerce years ago. And this is a 2 Erjiao bill, and this is a 1 Yijiao bill, very small. Jiao, I believe, was the equivalent of a cent. The yuan would be the dollar, and then the jiao would be the cent, I think. Somebody might want to correct me on that. So, as we can see here, there's many different kinds of currencies all over the world, and within those currencies there's many different ways of transferring it. Sometimes it's just electronic numbers on a computer screen. Nevertheless, it represents these sorts of things. And now if we look at that and we say, okay, these things can have value. What is it that gives them their value? Well, basically the definition of fiat currency is currency based on government decree. If we look back, take a step back when there was gold and silver and other items considered to be precious, that was an agreement that we made among the society. Government didn't have to decree it. We agreed individually that that thing had a certain value. But in these cases, it's just paper. It doesn't, without the decree, we might think it has little more value than just the paper itself, which would be maybe just fractions of pennies each one. So the question is, where does this get its value? Does it get its value by government decree? Well, I would say that perhaps it doesn't, because here's a good example. In Zimbabwe, in the late 2000s, they had a dollar, and it got to the point where they had hyperinflation because the people lost confidence due to corruption and so on in the country, in the currency. And they actually got to the point, if I'm correct here, of printing a 1 septillion dollar bill. And if you don't know what a septillion is, there's million, billion, trillion, quadrillion, quinillion, sextillion, septillion. That is, I think, 10 to the power of 24 illion. It's a lot of zeros. It's like running out of zeros on a bill to be able to print them. And therefore, they abandoned the currency in the year 2009, April 12, to then use whatever foreign currencies could come into the country. So as you can see, in spite of the fact that the government had decreed that the Zimbabwean dollar was the dollar of the land, of the country, the confidence was lost in it, and it wasn't there anymore. So the question then is, what is it that gives it its value? Any form of currency, even if it's gold. Well, I would say that in spite of all the information that we can be given in financial newspapers, by analysts, by reports of any kind, if we really dig down and we realize what gives all of these instruments their value, it's because we, human beings, collectively agree that they have value. Wouldn't that make sense? I mean, in the case of the Zimbabwean dollar, at one time, the society said, yeah, it was worth an amount. And at a certain point, they didn't anymore. And in countries that are more stable, well, people continue to agree. It depreciates over time, but they continue to agree that this Canadian dollar in this country is worth 5 of a certain number. That's interesting point number one. Interesting point, or interesting observation number two, is to ask the question, what is actually taking place when this is exchanged from one hand to another, either physically or an electronic transfer or something through a form of plastic card or a check, whatever it is. What is actually taking place? When we really look at it, we can realize that what's taking place is an acceptance for value. This has been agreed to be worth so much by the parties who are agreeing, and there's an acceptance for value. Well, what is that value? That value in the commercial realm is one of two things. It's a service or it's a product. And if we look at those two things from the perspective of the third point I want to make, which is what is the value in what is being exchanged for? You see, for this to go from my hand to your hand, there's an activity taking place. That means there's something coming from your hands or your realm to my realm, and that's a trade taking place, right? So what is the value that's coming back to me in that case? Once again, we said that there's either a product or a service, right? Well, the service is pretty easy to figure out. The service is, whether directly or indirectly, is human activity. If the service is performed by a machine, who built the machine, who organized the machine, who delivered the machine, who figured out how to work the machine, and if it's directly through human activity, it's human activity. It all comes down to human activity, human labor, in one way or another, right? Same goes for products. I've got a very old, antiquated cellular, call it cellular here in North America, phone, and some places you might call it a mobile phone. This, the raw materials of it alone, would basically be dust of some form and would be perceived as having almost no value. But this was put together in such a way that it has a certain function. What put this together? Human activity did, right? So we begin to see that the value which is exchanged, at the end of it, at the root of it all, is the human activity. Therefore, I would say that when we look at the whole thing, we human beings create the value in this by agreeing that it has a certain value. It's a representation of a certain value that we can use then to trade in commerce. We're the ones who then use it to accept for value. And we're the ones who create the value in the beginning. The value in what's being created, both in the products and the services. As we can see then, where was I here? As we can see then, in the order of creation of the value, it all stems from us. And whether the order of creation is this, because this was created, we got to remember, in order to trade the goods and the services, a medium in order to trade the goods and the services, not the other way around. So the goods and the services are first in the order of creation, and we're the ones who create the goods and the services. Therefore, it is us who create the real value, and real value is the real money. Currency is the system of trading the value. It's not really money in and of itself. Money is the value in the goods and the services when we really think about it at its root. When we think about it that way, we can come to realize that we human beings are the ones who create the value, and therefore if we want to have more of this in our lives, it is incumbent upon us to create greater value in what it is that we do in our daily activity, our daily commercial life, our jobs and so on, and to promote that in some way, to let people know that the value is there, let others know that the value is there. And as we talked about many times in previous discussions and in previous newsletters, that there is like this law almost of the universe, this equating out law of cause and effect, of equal and opposite reaction, that when value goes out, something must come back. And in the commercial setting, the value that comes back is this trading instrument. That's why, once again, that's why it is that we go to work, isn't it? Is to trade for this, because that is our current system that we know. So when we create more value, and we promote that value, such that others know about it, by the law of cause and effect, more of this will come back to us, and we'll experience more of it in our lives. And what is the value of that then? There must be a reason why. Well, we go to work 8 hours a day for a reason, is to get more of this, so that we can have a certain quality of life. So we realize that this is really just a tool. It's a tool we can work through in order to have a better quality of life. So when we have more of it, we can use it more effectively. It can be used destructively, yes. It can be used constructively. But we can choose. And when we choose to use it constructively, we can continue to build ourselves up. And like a cycle repeating itself, the more quality that we produce, the more of this that we can get, the more of this that we can get, the more tools that we can have to create even more quality and even more promotion, and we continue to build ourselves up and be a benefit to ourselves and a benefit to others. A few thoughts anyways. You can leave your comments as to what you thought about it, and I'll talk to you again in a few weeks. Bye-bye for now.